Cratylus by Plato, Part 2. Socrates. The name appears to me to be very nearly the same as the name Esti Anax. Both are Hellenic, and a king, Anax, and a holder, Hector, have nearly the same meaning, and are both descriptive of a king. For a man is clearly the holder of that which he is king. He rules, he owns, and holds it. But perhaps you may think that I am talking nonsense. And indeed, I believe that I myself did not know what I meant when I imagined that I had found some indication of the opinion of Homer about the correctness of names. I assure you that I think otherwise, and believe you to be on the right track. There is reason, I think, in calling the lion's whelp a lion, and the foal of a horse. I am speaking only of the ordinary course of nature when an animal produces after his kind, and not of extraordinary births. If contrary to nature a horse have a calf, then I should not call that a foal, but a calf. Nor do I call any in human birth a man, but only a natural birth. And the same may be said of trees and other things. Do you agree with me? Yes, I agree. Very good. But you had better watch me and see that I do not play tricks with you. For on the same principle, the son of a king is to be called a king. And whether the syllables of the name are the same or not the same makes no difference, provided the meaning is retained. Nor does the addition or subtraction of a letter make any difference, so long as the essence of the thing remains in possession of the name and appears in it. What do you mean? A very simple matter. I may illustrate my meaning by the names of letters, which you know are not the same as the letters themselves, with the exception of the four, E, U, O, short, and E, U, O, O. So epsilon, E-U-O-O. The names, a very simple matter. I may illustrate my meaning by the names of letters, which you know are not the same as the letters themselves, with the exception of the four E-U-O-U. Short and long. The name of the rest, whether vowels or consonants, are made up of other letters. Which we add to them. But so long as we introduce the meaning, and there can be no mistake, the name of the letter is quite correct. Take, for example, the letter beta. The addition of eta gives no offense, and does not prevent the whole name from having the value which the legislator intended. So well did he know how to give the letters names. I believe you are right. It may not the same be said of a king. A king will often be the son of a king, the good son or the noble son of a good or noble sire. And similarly, the offspring of every kind in the regular course of nature is like the parent, and therefore has the same name, yet the syllables may be disguised until they appear different to the ignorant person, and he may not recognize them, although they are the same, just as any one of us would recognize the same drugs under different disguises of color and smell, although to the physician who regards the power of them, they are the same, and he is not put out by the addition, and in like manner the etymologist is not put out by the addition or transposition or subtraction of a letter or two, or indeed by the change of all the letters, for this need not interfere with the meaning. As was just now said, the names of Hector and Astyanax have only one letter alike, which is T, and yet they have the same meaning. And how little in common with the letters of their names has Archepolus, ruler of the city, and yet the meaning is the same. And there are many other names which just mean king. Again, there are several names for a general, as, for example, Aegis, leader, and Polymarchus, chief in war, and Eupolemos, good warrior, and others which denote a physician, as Iachocles, famous healer, and Asymbrotus, curer of mortals, and there are many others which might be cited, differing in their syllables and letters, but having the same meaning. Would you not say so? Yes. The same names, then, ought to be assigned to those who follow in the course of nature. Yes. And what of those who follow out of the course of nature and their prodigies? And what of those who follow out of the course of nature and are prodigies? For example, when a good and religious man has an irreligious son, he ought to bear the name not of his father, but of the class to which he belongs, just as in the case which was before supposed of a horse foaling a calf. Quite true. Then the irreligious son of a religious man should be called irreligious. Certainly, he should not be called Theophilus, beloved of God, or Nemesitheus, mindful of God, or any of these names. If names are correctly given, his should have an opposite meaning. Certainly, Socrates. Again, Hermogenes, there is Orestes, the man of the mountains, who appears to be rightly called, whether chance gave the name, or perhaps some poet who meant to express the brutality and fierceness and mountain wilderness of his hero's nature. That is very likely, Socrates, and his father's name is also according to nature. Clearly. Yes, for as his name, so also is his nature. Agamemnon, admirable for remaining, is one who is impatient and persevering in the accomplishment of his resolves, and by his virtue crowns them, and his continuance at Troy with all the vast army is a proof of that admirable endurance in him which is signified by the name Agamemnon. I also think that Atreus is rightly called for his murder of Chrysippus and his exceeding cruelty to Thyestes are damaging and destructive to his reputation. The name is a little altered and disguised so as not to be intelligible to everyone, but to the etymologists there is no difficulty in seeing the meaning. For whether you think of him as Eteres, the stubborn, or Atrestos, the fearless, or as Ateros, the destructive one, the name is perfectly correct in every point of view. And I think that Pelops is also named appropriately, for as the name implies, he is rightly called Pelos, or Pelops, who sees what is near only. Ota Pelos Oron. How so? Because according to the tradition, he had no forethought or foresight of all the evil which the murder of Cratylus would entail upon his whole race in remote ages. He saw only what was at hand and immediate, or in other words, pelas, near, in his eagerness to win Hippodamia by all means for his bride. Every one would agree that the name Tantalus is rightly given and in accordance with nature, if the traditions about him are true. And what are the traditions? Many terrible misfortunes are said to have happened to him in his life. Last of all came the utter ruin of his country, and after his death he had the stone suspended, diaiionta, over his head in the world below. All this agrees wonderfully well with his name. You might imagine that some person who wanted to call him diaiontatos, the most weighted down by misfortune, disguised the name by altering it into Tantalus. And into this form, by some accident of tradition, it has actually been transmuted. The name of Zeus, who is his alleged father, has also an excellent meaning, although hard to be understood, because really, like a sentence, which is divided into two parts, for some call him Xena, and use the one half, and others use the other half, call him Dia. The two together signify the nature of the god and the business of a name. As we were saying, is to express the nature. For there is none who is more the author of life to us and to all than the Lord and King of all. Wherefore we are right in calling him Xena and Dia, which are one name, although divided, meaning the God through whom all creatures always have life. Dion, Zen, E, Pase, Toi, Zozen, Upareke. There is an irreverence at first sight in calling him son of Kronos, who is a proverb for stupidity, and we might rather expect Zeus to be the child of a mighty intellect, which is the fact, for this is the meaning of his father's name, Kronos quasi koros, korio, to sweep. Not in the sense of a youth, but signifying to cha theron jai acharaton thou nu, the pure and garnished mind. Sig apu tu joren. He, as we are informed by tradition, was begotten of Uranus, rightly so called Apu Tau Oren Ta Anu. From looking upwards, which, as philosophers tell us, is the way to have a pure mind. And the name Uranus is therefore correct. If I could remember the genealogy of Hesiod, I would have gone on and tried more conclusions of the same sort on the remoter ancestors of the gods. Then I might have seen whether this wisdom, which has come to me all in an instant, I know not whence, will or will not hold good to the end. You seem to me, Socrates, to be quite like a prophet, newly inspired, and to be uttering oracles. Yes, Hermogenes, and I believe that I caught the inspiration from the great Euthyphro of the Prospalaetian Deme, who gave me a long lecture which commenced at dawn. He talked and I listened, and his wisdom and enchanting ravishment has not only filled my ears but taken possession of my soul. And today I shall let his superhuman power work and finish the investigation of names. That will be the way. But tomorrow, if you are so disposed, we will conjure him away and make a purgation of him, if we can only find some priest or sophist who is skilled in purification of this sort. With all my heart, for am very curious to hear the rest of the inquiry about names. Then let us proceed. And where would you have us begin? Now that we have got a sort of outline of the inquiry, are there any names which witness of themselves that they are not given arbitrarily, but have a natural fitness? The names of heroes and of men in general are apt to be deceptive because they are often called after ancestors with whose names, as we were saying, they may have no business, or they are the expression of a wish, like Euthycides, the son of good fortune, or Sosius, the savior, or Theophilus, the beloved of God, and others. But I think that we had better leave these, for there will be more chance of finding correctness in the names of immutable essences. There ought to have been more care taken about them when they were named, and perhaps there may have been some more than human power at work occasionally in giving them names. I think so, Socrates. Ought we not to begin with the consideration of the gods and show that they are rightly named gods? Yes, that will be well. My notion would be something of this sort. I suspect that the sun, moon, earth, stars, and heaven, which are still the gods of many barbarians, were the only gods known to the aboriginal Hellenes, seeing that they were always moving and running. From their running nature, they were called gods or runners. Theos, Diaiontas. And when men became acquainted with the other gods, they proceeded to apply the same name to them all. Do you think that likely? I think it is very likely indeed. What shall follow the gods? Must not demons and heroes and men come next? Demons. And what do you consider to be the meaning of this word? Tell me if my view is right. Let me hear. You know how Hestia uses the word? I do not. Do you remember that he speaks of a golden race of men who came first? Yes, I do. He says of them, but now that fate has closed over this race, they are holy demons upon the earth, beneficent, averters of ills, guardians of mortal men. What is the inference? What is the inference? Why, I suppose that he means by the golden men, not men literally made of gold, but good and noble. And I am convinced of this, because he further says that we are the iron race. That is true. And do you not suppose that good men of our own day would by him be said to be of golden race? Very likely. And are not the good wise? Yes, they are wise. And therefore I have the most entire conviction that he called them demons, because they were daimones, knowing or wise. And in our older Attic dialect, the word itself occurs. Now he and other poets say truly that when a good man dies, he has honor and a mighty portion among the dead, and becomes a demon, which is a name given to him, signifying wisdom. And I say too that every wise man who happens to be a good man is more than human, daimonion, both in life and death, and is rightly called a demon. Then I rather think that I am one mind with you. But what is the meaning of the word hero? Eros? I think there is no difficulty in explaining, for the name is not much altered, and signifies that they were born of love. What do you mean? Do you know that the heroes are demigods? Do you not know that the heroes are demigods? What then? All of them sprang either from the love of a god for a mortal woman, or of a mortal man for a goddess. Think of the word in the Old Attic, and you will see better that the name heroes is only a slight alteration of eros, from whom the heroes sprang. Either this is the meaning, or if not this, then they must have been skillful as rhetoricians and dialecticians, and able to put the question, irotan, for erein, is equivalent to legein. And therefore, as I was saying, in the Attic dialect, the heroes turn out to be rhetoricians and questioners. All this is easy enough. The noble breed of heroes are a tribe of sophists and rhetors. But can you tell me why men are called anthropoi? That is more difficult. No, I cannot. And I would not try even if I could, because I think that you are the more likely to succeed. That is to say, you trust to the inspiration of Euthyphro. Of course, your faith is not in vain, for at this very moment a new and ingenious thought strikes me, and if I am not careful, before tomorrow's dawn, I shall be wiser than I ought to be. Now attend to me, and first, remember that we of put in and pull out letters and words and give names as we please and change the accents. Take, for example, the word di-phylos. In order to convert this from a sentence into a noun, we omit one of the iotas and sound the middle syllable grave instead of acute. As on the other hand, letters are sometimes inserted in words instead of being omitted, and the acute takes the place of the grave. That is true. The name anthropos, which was once a sentence and is now a noun, appears to be a case just of this sort. For one letter, which is the A, has been omitted, and the acute on the last syllable has been changed to a grave. What do you mean? I mean to say that the word man implies that other animals never examine, or consider, or look up at what they see, but that man not only sees, opope, but considers and looks up at that which he sees, and hence he alone of all animals is rightly anthropos, meaning anathron a opopen. May I ask you to examine another word about which I am curious? Certainly. I will take that which appears to me to follow next in order. You know the distinction of soul and body? Of course. Let us endeavor to analyze them like the previous words. You want me, first of all, to examine the natural fitness of the word synche, soul, and then of the word soma, body? Yes. If I am to say what occurs to me at the moment, I should imagine that those who first use the name synche meant to express that the soul in the body is the source of life and gives the power of breath and revival, ana suchun. And when this reviving power fails, then the body perishes and dies. And this, if I am not mistaken, they call psyche. But please stay a moment. I fancy that I can discover something which will be more acceptable to the disciples of Euthyphro, for I am afraid that they will scorn this explanation. What do you say to another? Let me hear. What is that which holds and carries and gives life and motion to the entire nature of the body? What else but the soul? Just that. And do you not believe with Anaxagoras, the mind or soul is the ordering and containing principle of all things? Yes, I do. Then you may well call that power fuseche, which carries and holds nature, I fusin oke kai ike. And this may be refined away into suche, hair, her. Certainly, and this derivation is, I think, more scientific than the other. It is so, but I cannot help laughing. If I am to suppose that this was the true meaning of the name, But what shall we say to the next word? You mean soma, the body? Yes. That may be variously interpreted, and yet more variously if a little permutation is allowed. For some say that the body is the grave, sema, of the soul, which may be thought to be buried in our present life, or again the index of the soul, because the soul gives indications to simene, the body. Probably the Orphic poets were the inventors of the name, and they were under the impression that the soul is suffering the punishment of sin, and that the body is an enclosure or prison in which the soul is incarcerated, kept safe, soma, sozete, as the name uma implies, until the penalty is paid. According to this view, not even a letter of the word need be changed. I think, Socrates, that we have said enough of this class of words, but have we any more explanations of the names of gods, like that which you were giving of Zeus? I should like to know whether any similar principle of correctness is to be applied to them. Yes, indeed, Hermogenes. And there is one excellent principle which, as men of sense, we must acknowledge. That of the gods we know nothing, either of their natures or of the names which they give themselves. But we are sure that the names by which they call themselves, whatever they may be, are true. And this is the best of all principles. And the next best is to say, as in prayers, that we will call them by any sort of kind names or patronymics which they like, because we do not know of any other. That also, I think, is a very good custom, and one which I should much wish to observe. Let us then, if you please, in the first place, announce to them that we are not inquiring about them. We do not presume that we are able to do so, but we are inquiring about the meaning of men in giving them these names. In this, there can be small blame. I think, Socrates, that you are quite right, and I would like to do as you say. Shall we begin, then, with Hestia, according to custom? Yes, that will be proper. What may we suppose him to have meant who gave the name Hestia? That is another, and certainly a most difficult question. My dear Hermogenes, the first imposers of names must surely have been considerable persons. They were philosophers and had a good deal to say. Well, and what of them? They are the men to whom I should attribute the imposition of names. Even in foreign names, if you analyze them, a meaning is still discernible. For example, that which we term ousia is by some called Hestia, and by others again ossia. Now, that the essence of things should be called Hestia, which is akin to the first of these, Hestia equals Hestia, is rational enough. And there is reason in the Athenians calling that Hestia which participates in ousia. For in ancient times, we too seem to have said Hestia for ousia or ousia. And this you may note to have been the idea of those who appointed that sacrifices should be first offered to Hestia, which was natural enough if they meant that Hestia was the essence of things. Those again who read ousia seem to have inclined to the opinion of Heraclitus, that all things flow and nothing stands. With them the pushing principle, orthon, is the cause and ruling power of all things, and is therefore rightly called ousia. Enough of this, which is all that we who know nothing can affirm. Next, in order after Hestia, we ought to consider Rhea and Kronos. Although the name Kronos has been already discussed, but I dare say that I am talking great nonsense. Why, Socrates, my good friend, I have discovered a hive of wisdom. Of what nature? Well, rather ridiculous, and yet plausible. How plausible? I fancy to myself Heraclitus repeating wise traditions of antiquity, as old as the days of Kronos and Rhea, and of which Homer also spoke. How do you mean? Heraclitus is supposed to say that all things are in motion and nothing at rest. He compares them to the stream of a river and says that you cannot go into the same water twice. That is true. Well then, how can we avoid inferring that he who gave the names of Kronos and Rhea to the ancestors of the gods agreed pretty much in the doctrine of Heraclitus? Is the giving of the names of streams to both of them purely accidental? Compare the line in which Homer, and as I believe Hesiod also tells of, ocean, the origin of gods, and mother Tethys. And again, Orpheus says that the fair river of ocean was the first to marry, and he espoused his sister Tethys, who was his mother's daughter. You see that this is a remarkable coincidence, and all in the direction of Heraclitus. I think that there is something in what you say, Socrates, but I do not understand the meaning of the name Tethys. Well, that is almost self-explained, being only the name of a spring, a little disguised. For that which is strained and filtered, diatomenon, may be likened to a spring, and the name Tethys is made up of these two words. The idea is ingenious, Socrates, to be sure. But what comes next? Of Zeus we have spoken. Yes. Then let us next take up his two brothers, Poseidon and Pluto. Whether the latter is called by that or by his other name, by all means. Poseidon is Poseidesmos, the chain of the feet. The original inventor of the name had been stopped by the watery element in his walks, and not allowed to go on, and therefore he called the ruler of this element Poseidon. The E was probably inserted The E was probably inserted as an ornament. Yet perhaps not so, but the name may have been originally written with a double I, with a double L, and not with an S. Meaning that the god knew many things. Pola edus. And perhaps also he, being the shaker of the earth, has been named from shaking, seeing, or seeing, and then P and D have been added. Pluto gives wealth, Plotos, and his name means the giver of wealth, which comes out of the earth beneath. People in general appear to imagine that the term Hades is connected with the invisible, Aides, and so they are led by their fears to call the god Pluto instead. And what is the true derivation? In spite of the mistakes which are made about the power of this deity, and the foolish fears which people have of him, such as the fear of always being with him after death, and of the soul denuded of the body going to him, my belief is that all is quite consistent, and that the office and name of the god really correspond. Why? How is that? I will tell you my own opinion, but first I should like to ask why. I will tell you my own opinion, but first I should like to ask you, which chain does any animal feel to be the stronger, and which confines him more to the same spot, desire or necessity? Desire, Socrates, is stronger, far. And do you not think that many a one would escape from Hades if he did not bind those who depart to him by the strongest of chains? Assuredly they would. And if by the greatest of chains, then by some desire, as I should certainly infer, and not by necessity? That is clear. And there are many desires, yes. And therefore, by the greatest desire, if the chain is to be the greatest, yes. And is any desire stronger than the thought that you will be made better by associating with another? Certainly not. And is not that the reason, Hermogenes, why no one who has been to him is willing to come back to us? Even the sirens, like all the rest of the world, have been laid under his spells. Such a charm as I imagine is the God able to infuse into his words. And according to this view, he is the perfect and accomplished sophist, and the great benefactor of the inhabitants of the other world. And even to us who are upon earth, he sends from below exceeding blessings, for he has much more than he wants down there. Wherefore he is called Pluto, or the rich. Note also that he will have nothing to do with men while they are in the body, but only when the soul is liberated from the desires and evils of the body. Now there is a great deal of philosophy and reflection in that, for in their liberated state he can bind them with the desire of virtue. But while they are flustered and maddened by the body, Not even Father Kronos himself would suffice to keep them with him in his own far-famed chains. There is a deal of truth in what you say. Yes, Hermogenes, and the legislator called him Hades, not from the unseen Aedes, far otherwise, but from his knowledge, Edeni, of all noble things. Very good. And what do we say of Demeter and Hera and Apollo and Athene and Hephaestus and Ares and the other deities? Demeter is di dusa meter, who gives food like a mother. Hera is the lovely one, erate, for Zeus. According to tradition, Hera is the lovely one, erate, for Zeus, according to tradition, loved and married her. Possibly also the name may be given when the legislature was thinking of the heavens, and may be only a disguise of the air. Air. Putting the end in the place of the beginning. Rhea. You will recognize the truth of this if you repeat the letters of Hera several times over. People dread the name of Thereupon as they dread the name of Apollo, and with as little reason. The fear, if I am not mistaken, only arises from their ignorance of the nature of names. But they go changing the name into Persephone, and they are terrified at this, whereas the new name means only that the goddess is wise, Sophe. Foreseeing that all things in the world are in motion, pheromenon, that principle which embraces and touches and is able to follow them is wisdom, and therefore the goddess may be truly called Pherepathe, Pherepatha, or some other name like it, because she touches that which is to pheromenon e haptomene, herein showing her wisdom. And Hades, who is wise, consorts with her, because she is wise. They alter her name into Pherefata nowadays, because the present generation care for euphony more than truth. There is the other name, Apollo, which, as I was saying, is generally supposed to have some terrible signification. Have you remarked this fact? To be sure I have. And what you say is true. But the name, in my opinion, is really most expressive of the power of God. How so? I will endeavor to explain. For I do not believe that any single name could have been better adapted to express the attributes of God, embracing and in a manner signifying all four of them, music and prophecy and medicine and archery. That must be a strange name, and I should like to hear the explanation. Say rather an harmonious name, as beseems the God of harmony. In the first place, the purgations and purifications which doctors and diviners use, and their fumigations with drugs, magical and medicinal, as well as their washings and lustrous sprinklings, have all one and the same object, which is to make a man pure both in body and soul. Very true. And is not Apollo the purifier and the washer and the absolver from all impurities? Very true. Then in reference to his ablutions and absolutions, as being the physician who orders them, he may be rightly called apoluon, purifier. And in respect of his powers of divination, and his truth and sincerity, which is the same as truth, he may be most fitly called aplos, from aplus, sincere. As in the Thessalian dialect, for all the Thessalians call him aplos. Also he is balon, always shooting, because he is a master archer who never misses. Or again, the name may refer to his musical attributes. And then, as in akoluthos and akoitas, akoitas, and in many other words that the A is supposed to mean together. So the meaning of the name Apollo will be moving together, whether in the poles of heaven, as they are called, or in the harmony of song, which is termed concord, because he moves all together by an harmonious power, as astronomers and musicians ingeniously declare. And he is the God who presides over harmony and makes all things move together, both among gods and among men. And as in the words akolothos and aquatus, the A is substituted for an O. So the name Apollon is equivalent to Opolon. Only the second L is added in order to avoid the ill-omened sound of destruction, Apollon. Now the suspicion of this destructive power still haunts the minds of some who do not consider the true value of the name, which, as I was saying just now, has reference to all the powers of God, who is the single one, the ever-darting, the purifier, the mover together, aplus, balon, apulo, on, opolon, the name of the muses and of music, which seem to be derived from their making philosophical inquiries, Mostai. And Leto is called by this name because she is a gentle goddess, and so willing, Etho Emon, to grant our request. Or her name may be Letho, as she is often called by strangers. They seem to imply by it her amiability and her smooth and easygoing way of behaving. Artemis is named for her healthy, Artemis, well-ordered nature, and because of her love of virginity, perhaps because she is a proficient in virtue, arete, and perhaps also as hating intercourse of the sexes, ton oroton misisa. He who gave the goddess her name may have had any or all of these reasons. What is the meaning of Dionysus and Aphrodite? Son of Hipponikos, you ask a solemn question. There is a serious and also a fallacious explanation of both these names. The serious explanation is not to be had from me, but there is no objection to you hearing the fallacious one, for the gods too love a joke. Dionysus is simply Didus, onon, giver of wine, as he might be called in fun, and oinos is properly oionos, or oanos, because wine makes those who drink think, oeste, that they have a mind, noun, when they have none. The derivation of Aphrodite, born of the foam, aporos, may be fairly accepted on the authority of Hestia. Still there remains Athene, whom you, Socrates, as an Athenian, will surely not forget. There are also Hephaestus and Ares. I am not likely to forget them. No, indeed. There is no difficulty in explaining the other appellation of Athene. What other appellation? We call her Pallas, to be sure, and we cannot be wrong in supposing that this is derived from armed dances, for the elevation of oneself or another, for the elevation of oneself or anything above the earth, or by the use of the hands, we call shaking, diaion, or dancing. This is quite true. Then that is the explanation of the name Pallas. Yes, but what do you say of the other name, Athene? Yes. That is a graver matter. And there, my friend, the modern interpreters of Homer, I think. That is a graver matter, and there, my friend, the modern interpreters of Homer may, I think, assist in explaining the view of the ancients. For most of these, in their explanations of the poet, assert that he meant by Athene mind, nous, and intelligence, dia, and the maker of names appears to have had a singular notion about her, and indeed calls her by a still higher title, divine intelligence. Thou gnosis. As though he would say, this is she who has the mind of God, theonoia, using A as a dialectical variety E, and taking away I and S. Perhaps, however, the name theone or theonoe may mean she who knows divine things, thea nusa, better than others. Nor shall we be far wrong in supposing that the author of it wished to identify this goddess with moral intelligence, in ete nusen, and therefore gave her the name ethonoi, which, however, either he or his successors have altered into what they thought a nicer form and called her Athene. But what do you say of Hephaestus? Speak you of the princely lord of light? Theos Istora? Surely. Hephaestus is Phaestos and has added the E by attraction. That is obvious to anybody. Hephaestus, that is very probable until some more probable notion gets into your head. To prevent that, you had better ask, what is the derivation of Aries? What is Aries? Aries may be called, if you will, from his manhood, Auden, and manliness, or if you please, from his hard and unchangeable nature, which is the meaning of aratos. The latter is a derivation in every way appropriate to the god of war. Very true. And now, by the gods, let us have no more of the gods, for I am afraid of them. Ask about anything but them, and thou shalt see how the speed of Euthyphro can prance. Only one more god. I should like to know about Hermes, of whom I am said not to be a true son. Let us make him out, and then I shall know whether there is any meaning in what Cratylus says. I should imagine that the name Hermes has to do with speech, and signifies that he is the interpreter, Erminios, or messenger, or thief, or liar, or bargainer. All that sort of thing has a great deal to do with language. As I was telling you, the word diaion is expressive of the use of speech, and there is an often recurring Homeric word, emesato, which means he contrived. Out of these two words, eren and misetai, the legislator, formed the name of the god who invented language and speech, and we may imagine him dictating to us the use of this name. O my friends, says he to us, seeing that he is the contriver of tales or speeches, you may rightly call him Artemis. And this has been improved by us, as we think, into Hermes. Iris also appears to have been called from the verb to tell, Aaron, because she was a messenger. Then I am very sure that Cratylus was quite right in saying that I was no true son of Hermes, Hermogenes, for I am not a good hand at speeches. There is also reason, my friend, in Pan being the double-formed son of Hermes. How do you make that out? You are aware that speech signifies all things, pan, and is always turning them round and round, and has two forms, true and false. Certainly, is not the truth that is in him the smooth or scarred form which dwells above among the gods, whereas falsehood dwells among men below, and is rough like the goat of tragedy. For tales and falsehoods have generally to do with the tragic or goatish life, and tragedy is the place of them. Very true. Then surely Pan, who is the declarer of all things, Pan, and the perpetual mover, bolon, of all things, is rightly called bolus, goatherd. He being the two-formed son of Hermes, smooth in the upper part and rough and goat-like in his lower region. And as the son of Hermes, he is speech, or the brother of speech. And that brother should be like brother is no marvel. But as I was saying, my dear Hermogenes, let us get away from the gods. From these sort of gods, by all means, Socrates, but why should we not discuss another kind of gods? The sun, moon, stars, earth, aether, air, fire, water, the seasons, and the year. You impose a great many tasks upon me. Still, if you wish, I will not refuse. You will oblige me. How would you have me begin? Shall I take first of all him whom you mentioned first, the sun? Very good. The origin of the sun will probably be clearer in the Doric form, for the Dorians call him Helios. And this name is given to him because when he rises, he gathers. Ali Zoe. Men together, or because he is always rolling in his course. Diaion, about the earth. Or from Iolane, of which meaning is the same as boikilane, to variegate, because he variegates the productions of the earth. But what is Selene, the moon? The name is rather unfortunate for Anaxagoras. How so? The word seems to forestall his recent discovery that the moon receives her light from the sun. Why do you say so? The two words celeste, brightness, and phos, light, have much the same meaning. Yes, this light about the moon is always new, neon, and always old, enon, if the disciples of Anaxagoras say truly. For the sun in his revolution always adds new light, and there is the old light of the previous month. Very true. The moon is not unfrequently called Selenia. True. And as she has a light which is always old and always new, enon neon I. She may very properly have the name Sile Nonio Ea, and this, when hammered into shape, becomes Silania. A real dithyrambic sort of name that, Socrates. But what do you say of the month and the stars? Mes, month, is called from mi woste, to lessen, because suffering diminution. The name of astra, stars, seems to be derived from astrape, which is an improvement on anastphope, signifying the upsetting of the eyes. Anastrophein opa. What do you say of pur, fire, or udr, water? I am at a loss how to explain pur. Either the muse Euthyphro has deserted me, or there is some very great difficulty in the word. Please, however, to know the contrivance which I adopt whenever I am in a difficulty of this sort. What is it? I will tell you, but I should like to know first whether you can tell me what is the meaning of the pur. Indeed, I cannot. Shall I tell you what I suspect to be the true explanation of this in several other words? My belief is that they are of foreign origin, for the Hellenes, especially those who were under the dominion of the barbarians, often borrowed from them. What is the inference? Why, you know that anyone who seeks to demonstrate the fitness of these names according to the Hellenic language, and not according to the language from which the words are derived, is rather likely to be at fault. Yes, certainly. Well then, consider whether this pure is not foreign, P-U-R. For the word is not easily brought into relation with the Hellenic tongue, and the Phrygians may be observed to have the same word slightly changed. Phrygians, just as they have udr, water, and kunes, dogs, and many other words. That is true. Any violent interpretation of the words should be avoided, for something to say about them may easily be found, and thus I get rid of pure and udr. Air, air, Hermogenes, may be explained as the element which raises, are, things from the earth, or as ever-flowing, aipe, or because the flux of the air is wind, and the poets call the wind air blast, etai. He who uses the term may mean, so to speak, air flux, etorun, in the sense of wind flux, pneumatorum. And because this moving wind may be expressed by either term, he employs the word air, equals etes reo. Ether, I should interpret as aether, or aesir. This may be correctly said because this element is always running in a flux about the air. E, thi, pere, tau, ere, rum. The meaning of the word gi, or g, earth, comes out better when in the form of Gaia, or Gaia, for the earth may be truly called mother, Gaia, genetera, as in the language of Homer, Odyssey 9:118 and 13:160. Gigese means geneste. Good. What shall we take next? Here, there are ore, the seasons, and the two names of the year, iniatos and ethos. The ore should be spelt in the Old Attic way, if you desire to know the probable truth about them. They are rightly called the ore because they divide, ori zosen, the summers and winters and winds and the fruits of the earth. The words iniatos and ethos appear to be the same. That which brings to light the plants and growths of the earth in their turn, and passes them in review within itself, in ioto exetaze. This is broken up into two words, iniatos from in iato, and ethos from etaze. Just as the original name of Zeus was divided into Zena and Dia, and the whole proposition means that his power of reviewing from within is one, but has two names, two words, ethos and iniatos, being thus formed out of a single proposition. Indeed, Socrates, you are making surprising progress. I am run away with, very true, but am not yet at my utmost speed. I should like very much to know, in the next place, how you would explain the virtues. What principle of correctness is there in those charming words, wisdom, understanding, justice, and the rest of them? That is a tremendous class of names which you are disinterring. Still, as I have put on the lion's skin, I must not be faint of heart, and I suppose that I must consider the meaning of wisdom, phronesis, and understanding, sunesis, and judgment, nome, and knowledge, episteme, and all those other charming words as you call them. Surely we must not leave off until we find out their meaning. By the dog of Egypt, I have not a bad notion which came into my head only this moment. I believe that the primeval givers of names were undoubtedly like too many of our modern philosophers, who in their search after the nature of things are always getting dizzy from constantly going round, and then they imagine that the world is going round and moving in all directions. And this appearance, which arises out of their internal condition, they suppose to be a reality of nature. They think that there is nothing stable or permanent, but only flux and motion, and that the world is always full of every sort of motion and change. The consideration of the names which I mentioned has led me into making this reflection. How is that, Socrates? Perhaps you did not observe that in the names which have been just cited, the motion or flux or generation of things is most surely indicated. No, indeed, I never thought of it. Take the first of those which you mentioned. Clearly, that is a name indicative of motion. Hermogenes. What was the name? Socrates. Phronesis, wisdom, which may signify phroos, kai, ro, gnosis, perception of motion and flux, or perhaps phores, onesis, the blessing of motion, but is at any rate connected with ferente, motion, nome, judgment, again, certainly implies the ponderation or consideration, nomensis, of generation, For to ponder is the same as to consider, or if you would rather, here is gnosis, the very word just now mentioned, which is neoesis, the desire of the new. The word neos implies that the word is always in process of creation. The giver of the name wanted to express his longing of the soul, for the original name was neosis, and not noasis. The word sophro sune is the salvation, soteria, of that wisdom, phronesis, which we were just now considering. Epioteme, knowledge is akin to this, and indicates that the soul which is good for anything follows, epitai, the motion of things, neither anticipating them nor falling behind them, wherefore the word should rather be read as epistemene, inserting in. Sunesis, understanding, may be regarded in like manner as a kind of conclusion. The word is derived from sunene, to go along with, and like ipestaste, or ipestaste, to know, implies the progression of the soul in company with the nature of things. Sophia, wisdom, is very dark, and appears not to be of native growth. The meaning is touching the motion or stream of things. You must remember that the poets, when they speak of the commencement of any rapid motion, often use the word isuthe, he rushed, and there was a famous Lacedaemonian who was named Sus, rush. For by this word the Lacedaemonians signify rapid motion, and the touching ipathe of motion is expressed by Sophia. For all things are supposed to be in motion. Good, agathon, is the name which is given to the admirable agasto in nature. For although all things move, still there are degrees of motion. Some are swifter, some slower, but there are some things which are admirable for their swiftness, and this admirable part of nature is called agathon. Dikaiosune, justice, is clearly dikaiosunisis, understanding of the just. But the actual word dikaion is more difficult. Men are only agreed to a certain extent about justice, and then they begin to disagree. For those who suppose all things to be in motion conceive the greater part of nature to be a mere receptacle, and they say that there is a penetrating power which passes through all this, and is the instrument of creation and all, and is the subtlest and swiftest element. For if it were not the subtlest, and a power which none can keep out, and also the swiftest, passing by other things as if they were standing still, it could not penetrate through the moving universe. And this element, which superintends all things in pieces, diaion, all, is rightly called dikaion. The letter K is only added for the sake of euphony. Thus far as I was saying, there is a general agreement about the nature of justice, but I, Hermogenes, being an enthusiastic disciple, have been told in a mystery that the justice of which I am speaking is also the cause of the world. Now, a cause is that because of which something is created, and someone comes and whispers in my ear that justice is rightly so called because partaking of the nature of the cause, as I begin, and someone comes and whispers in my ear that justice is rightly so called because partaking of the nature of the cause, and I begin, after hearing what he has said, to interrogate him gently. Well, my excellent friend, say I, but if all this be true, I still want to know what is justice. Thereupon they think that I ask tiresome questions and am leaping over the barriers and have been already sufficiently answered, and they try to satisfy me with one derivation after another, and at length they quarrel. For one of them says that justice is the sun, and that he only is piercing, diaionta, diaionta, and burning, kaonta, kaonta, element which is the guardian of nature. And when I joyfully repeat this beautiful notion, I am answered by the satirical remark, what? Is there no justice in the world when the sun is down? And when I earnestly beg my questioner to tell me his own honest opinion, he says, fire in the abstract. But this is not very intelligible. Another says, no, not fire in the abstract, but the abstraction of heat in the fire. Another man professes to laugh at all this and says, as Anaxagoras says, that justice in mind, for mind, as they say, has absolute power. That justice is mind, for mind, as they say, has absolute power and mixes with nothing, and orders all things, and passes through all things. At last, my friend, I find myself in far greater perplexity about the nature of justice than I was before I began to learn. But still I am of opinion that the name which has led me into this digression was given to justice for the reasons which I have mentioned. I think, Socrates, that you are improvising now. You must have heard this from someone, and not the rest.